Welcome back, everybody, again to the Freedom Law School's 2009 Health and Freedom Conference on this March 14th, 2009. My name is Payman Motahedeh. I'm the founder and president of Freedom Law School and your host for this conference that we've done every year since 1999. And our next speaker is someone that we had in first schedule. Thank you. Thank you. We had him first scheduled to speak at our 1999 conference. We could not announce who he was at the time. He was kind of an undercover secret. This guy was an IRS official, and he was going to come out and expose the lies of the IRS, the income tax. And he was still working with the IRS as a special agent with their criminal investigation division for 5 years, a fast rising career. And so we couldn't put his picture up on the brochure even to advertise that who he is. But I'm glad now that we are able to say who he is, because he's been speaking out publicly since 1999 about the IRS lies, fraud, deceit, what they're hiding from you that they don't want you to know, folks. This is supposed to be America, not Soviet Union, not Nazi Germany, not a communist country. We're supposed to have openness in our government. Well, I think his incredible story will share with you not only problems with the income tax, but also lack of openness with the government that we need to change. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to Mr. Joseph Banister.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Well, I couldn't believe when I kind of looked at the calendar. Am I doing all right? First of all, how is everybody today? That's good. That it's been 10 years. I mean, it was March of 1999 when I came and spoke at the Freedom Law School conference, and I think I might have missed 1 year, but I think I've been here ever since. So hopefully there aren't too many people that have watched the speech for 9 times. But it's been quite a ride for 10 years. The IRS has seen to that. But I'm very thankful to the Freedom Law School, Free Enterprise Society, people that, as Payman mentioned, when he said kind of undercover, from, 1998, 1999, I was talking with these guys, these tax protesters, and they were sharing information with me. And so I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with the information. Then when I decided I was going to leave the IRS, then it was okay to, use my picture and my name and everything. So anyway, I'll tell you a little story and see how you like it. I call this the favored Fed enemy of the state in 11 years flat. And I guess that's just the amount of time that it took me to go from, somebody favored by the government to somebody hated by the government, at least when they came out and showed me just how much they hated me. That's a picture of me at a Citizens Police Academy in East Palo Alto, California in about 1997. I wasn't shaking down that little lady there for her purse. But there was a firearms training simulator, and the East Palo Alto Police Department, they knew that the IRS had some pretty expensive toys. That white thing right there is a $60,000 piece of equipment. And it's basically like a large a video game for adults. So you could take that, that's a real Sig Sauer that they gutted and put a laser in it, and you could shoot it at a screen just like this one, and it would register your shots, and they would have a good guy, bad guy scenario where somebody was pulling out either wallet or a gun. And so if you shot the guy pulling out his wallet, you didn't pass the video game. If you shot the guy that got the gun out, then you got 100%. Anyway, that's an indicator of a time when I was really enjoying the job a great deal. I'll give you a little background about myself. I come from a family of terrorists. On your far left is my brother John. He's a sergeant in the California Highway Patrol. Next is my baby brother Jeff. He's a police officer with San Jose Police Department. And my mom is, no guns or badges on my mom. She just raised us all. My dad passed away in '93, just before I went into the IRS, so he couldn't be pictured with us, but he was always a big inspiration and cheerleader to me, and I think he would have supported me in my endeavors, whether going into the IRS or leaving the IRS. Next to the right of my mom, in your direction, is my brother Jim. He's a captain in the Daly City, California Fire Department. And then there's me at the end, and all they gave me is a little gun and a badge there. We took a little family photo. My mom was real proud of all the guns and badges that she raised, and then I went and ruined the picture by turning mine in. But little background, I mean, I grew up in a very good together household, mom and a dad, went to Catholic schools through high school. You know, considered myself to be just a normal middle-class kid, had 3 brothers to fight with and cause trouble with, and but we all kept our backgrounds pretty clean. You know, we're able to survive background checks and get jobs that we all considered to be worthwhile and worthy of the public's admiration. And what happened is my brother, actually John, at the end, he became a police officer at the CHP right about the time of the Rodney King riots. And his first day on the job was in the central LA office where they filmed Chips. And his first day on the job, with his FTO, he pulled over 4 armed robbery or bank robbery suspects out on the 405. So he was, trial by fire, definitely for him. But anyway, he became a law enforcement person prior to me, and there were a bunch of family members and friends who were in law enforcement. And I had gone the accounting route. It was quite the boring route, getting a degree in accounting and learning how to put little numbers in little boxes. And I looked at all these, I looked at what my boss was doing as a CFO, and I thought, I don't really want to be doing this in 10 years. And I looked around at all my relatives and friends who were in law enforcement, and I thought, that looks like something that I'd really like to do. So I applied to the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for a special agent position, and those agencies and many others, as Paymon likes to refer to them as the alphabet soup agencies, they really like people who have accounting degrees or law degrees or both. So I applied to the FBI and the IRS, and I really wanted to get a job with the FBI. I mean, they're the ones that have TV shows about them. I don't remember, except for maybe Elliot Ness, back when the ATF and the IRS were one. I don't recall any shows that were real popular that featured IRS agents. So FBI was where I really wanted to be, but for a long story short, they basically had a hiring freeze, and although I passed through all the gauntlets of evaluation at the FBI, they couldn't just actually hire me. In the meantime, the IRS called me, let's see, it was August of 1993, and asked me if I'd be interested in a special agent position with them. And a special agent, the reason they use the word special agent is you have special duties, and each of these agencies utilizes special agents as criminal investigators, and they investigate violations of the federal criminal statutes. FBI has a very wide jurisdiction, actually not as wide as they tell people, but it's very wide. I mean, they can investigate bank fraud and money laundering and kidnapping, you name it. the IRS, their jurisdiction is much smaller, and of course even much smaller than the IRS leads the public to believe. But nonetheless, primarily IRS special agents investigate money laundering and income tax cases. So the IRS called me, and I interviewed for the position, and I did qualify for it, and they offered me a position, and I was sworn in as a special agent in November of 1993 in Oakland, California. And the swearing-in ceremony was quite important to me. Usually they'll take like a whole bunch of IRS agents, like as many as are in this room, and they say, okay, raise your right hand, you know, take your oath, and they don't seem to really care about it. It's not much of a big deal. But for me, it was just by myself. I had my family present in the flag and, you know, raised my hand. I really meant a lot to me to take my oath to support and defend the Constitution in that manner. And I also really internalized that oath. Of course, the oath is taken to God, so of course I don't take that lightly at all, and that I meant to support and defend the Constitution to the best of my ability. I didn't realize how difficult adhering to that oath would become in my near future. At that time, I just thought, well, you know, I'm a good guy, and I know what the oath said, and I got a pretty good idea about the Constitution, so we'll just go from there, and everything will be fine. But a few more things happened that I wasn't quite prepared for. So I call these the pre-enlightenment days at the IRS. And my first day on the job, you know, when you first start out as an IRS agent, you don't have any cases, you don't have any case investigations to work on. So I was kind of twiddling my thumbs and wondering what I should do. And even though I was a government employee, I didn't want to act like one, you know, where you just put your feet up on the desk and do nothing. And you know, there's lots of government workers that don't do that. But I wanted to be productive. So I'm looking around and I see a copy of the Internal Revenue Code. And how many people have seen the Internal Revenue Code? It's huge. Okay, well, so I thought that could take up quite a bit of time until I got my first case. So I pulled them off the shelf and I started reading it, and my boss comes over. His name was Alex Sedio, was a former Marine. What are you doing? I'm just reading the Internal Revenue Code, the sections that I'm going to be investigating. And he said, put that away. You are not a CPA anymore, you're a special agent. And I just thought, okay, well, this is the culture shock. I'd spent many years as a CPA and wasn't afraid to pull out a resource manual or a reference manual to look at something. But here at the IRS, they don't like that. It's kind of odd. So I just kind of tucked that away and, you know, went on with my business. But I did think that was kind of an odd culture for an agency that was enforcing the laws to not want somebody to look at them. I already spoke about my swearing-in ceremony. In early 1994, after I was there with the IRS for a few weeks, they send you off to Glencoe, Georgia for a 16-week training where you learn all about criminal investigation and firearms use and defensive tactics and, you know, how to be a federal criminal investigator. A funny little story is that it's a room that was about this big, but it's like an amphitheater, so there's people at the very bottom and there's people up at the top. And because my name was Banister, B, I was down at the bottom with all the A's and the B's and the C's. And this instructor comes up and he says, you know, we'd like to collect some picture money for the class photo. So I need a volunteer. So he asks for volunteers, and nobody raises their hand, and everybody just looks real meek, you know, and I'm in the middle at the bottom. And so I look around me, and I'm like, what's the big deal? You know, collect some picture money? I mean, we're all accountants. We should be able to do that, no problem. So I raise my hand and say, I'll do it. Well, that was about the stupidest thing I ever did. Not stupid, but I mean, what had ended up happening was, well, then the next order of business was to elect a class president. Well, you have 40 people from all over the country who've never met each other before, and when they go to look for a candidate for class president, there's only one guy they know, Joe, the picture guy. So I ran unopposed and won. And then the second phase, which is another 8 weeks, there's 8 weeks in phase 1, 8 weeks in phase 2, and so the second 8 weeks I was reelected class president, and you speak at the graduation ceremony and collect picture money and T-shirts and that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of duties to it, and I still maintained 93% or 95% academic average, qualify as an expert in firearms. I worked hard. I really wanted to be a federal criminal investigator and protect the U.S. Treasury. That's what I intended to do. When I got out of training in early to mid 1994, I was assigned to the San Francisco office, and then I was transferred to the San Jose office, San Jose, California, and that was my hometown. So I thought I had arrived. I had a job that I loved. I was in my hometown, so when we go out and do surveillance, I'd have people that were from San Mateo or Los Angeles or Utah, and they didn't know the area. And so I knew everywhere, and so surveillances were nothing but fun for me because I knew where I was and where I was going, and everyone else was kind of lost and making U-turns and not figuring it out. I actually earned the nickname Spider-Man during surveillances because of I'd climb buildings and hide in bushes, and a very motivated special agent. I received some awards while I was at the IRS, a Superior Performance Award, Sustained Superior Performance Award, Asset Forfeiture Coordinator for the Central California District, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Coordinator, Firearms and Defensive Tactics Coordinator. And I don't say this to brag, I know that there's another segment of opinion out there, largely generated by the IRS, that I'm just this wacky kook. And so I just want to show you the kind of awards that they give to wacky kooks when they work for the IRS. And what I term the Enlightenment process, what happened was I was a fan of a radio station up in the San Francisco Bay Area called KSFO. They're still around. Back then, in the late 90s, they were just really cutting edge in terms of the kind of subject matter that they talked about on the radio. And you probably remember like from the 90s or even 80s, I guess, when Rush Limbaugh was on, and people were like so refreshed that they would talk about, certain issues. And KSFO was even more refreshing, at least in my opinion. And even though I was an IRS special agent, I never lost sight of that Constitution. I was a big Second Amendment supporter, really Constitution as a whole. In fact, I had bumper stickers in my cubicle that said, fear the government that fears your guns, and the one with Mao and Stalin and the other dictators, and it said, the experts agree gun control works. So the people in my IRS office, they kind of knew me. They pegged me as the Constitution guy. In fact, when we had training, they would pick me to be the tax protester. And this is before before I mention anything about where my thoughts were going. And we used to practice with what they call simunition, where you switch out the barrel in your real gun and you put in a soap pellet barrel, and they hurt pretty bad. Anybody ever got stung with one? So it didn't feel too good being the tax protester all the time. I'd come home from work with welts on my skin. Anyway, I heard on KSFO there was a host named Jeff Metcalf, Geoff, Metcalf, and he had a guest on his show named D.V. Kidd, D-E-V-V-Y. D.V. has an unusual name. Anyway, D.V. was making comments about the income tax and about the Federal Reserve, the 16th Amendment, a lot of the topics that you've heard discussed here and elsewhere. And if you can picture me driving in my government car on US 101 up there in the Bay Area and hearing this woman talk about the income tax and saying that it's voluntary, that Americans aren't required to pay it, and the 16th Amendment was never ratified, and I heard some of those kinds of claims before, but I never heard it on a radio station where other people could hear it like that. So I thought, this is not good. I mean, why is she saying all these things? You know, the income tax is voluntary and can't be too voluntary because that's what this Sig Sauer on my hip is for, you know. But she was adamant that it was, and she offered a little address you could write to for more information. And so I'm being honest, hope you believe me, even though I used to work for the IRS, that I wasn't doing this as some kind of a sub rosa investigation of her. It was from my own personal knowledge to try to find out why would she make these claims, and why would this radio station and this host allow her to say such things. The host, Jeff Metcalf, had always been very truthful prior to that. He had guests that made sense. It was really, there was no reason for me to doubt that he or his guests wouldn't be telling the truth, but it was obviously pretty contrary to what I had been taught as an accounting major, CPA, and IRS special agent. There's at least the spelling of their names. So as I say, I had a degree from San Jose State in '86, became a CPA in 1991, appointed as a special agent in '93. And people don't make claims like that if they're credible, if they really are true. So as I said, she gave an address of a place where you could send for more information, and I sent away for the information. And I think she asked for $1, so she certainly wasn't making any money on it. And she had these booklets. One was called Why a Bankrupt America, and the other was called Blind Loyalty. And I believe they're still available, probably on the internet. And so I started reading these books. And the interesting thing about them was that in the books, she would put the actual phone numbers and addresses of the people who made the claims. So being an investigator, that kind of appealed to me because, I like to check things out. And that's exactly what I started to do. I mean, I did quite a bit. It took me over 2 years, from basically January of 1997 through February of 1999 to come to this final conclusion, which of course I'll explain more soon. But just a tremendous amount of research on my part. As it was, I was working 50 hours a week. IRS special agents work a 40-hour week plus another quarter, or 10 hours, and then they're paid a premium for that. They're paid 125% because they work 125%. So in addition to the 50 hours a week, being a soccer coach, husband, father, I'm grabbing all these books, going to the law library, and trying to find out if what she said about the income tax not being mandatory for most Americans, if that was really true. So I set out to do that. As far as the contacts, well, I have to say, I mentioned before, but at some point I spoke to a man named Bill Conklin, and some of you may remember him. He still has a website and still helps people with IRS problems. But he suggested that I call a man named Paymon. And if you ever had that feeling maybe I shouldn't have taken these steps down this road, am I going to be talking to the grand poobah of tax protesters whose name is Paymon? I thought, okay, well, if you really think I should, so I did, and thankfully I shouldn't have judged by the name, because you all know and love Paymon, what he's done for freedom, which would make any native-born American blush. Which, by the way, I think we should give Paymon a round of applause for that. But anyway, Paymon, with his assistance, I did plenty on my own, but he would introduce me to certain people. Larry B. Kraft, you may have heard, a well-known attorney in the tax movement, Bill Benson, Jack McLam, Ted Gunderson, you name it. So I was able to speak with these people person to person, and this is all going on during 1997 and 1998 when I'm still working for the IRS every day. But I considered it to be, my own personal fact-finding mission. I didn't spend company time doing it. I'd either take time off, paid time off, or vacation days, or just evenings and weekends, driving my wife crazy for all the reading that I was doing. But over that 2-year period in 1997, 1998, there was just mountains, as I'm sure most of you have experienced, mountains of evidence to prove that the IRS might be up to something that's not too swift. And I have to say, especially after having my first raw milk in my life, that and I'm still alive. I'm going to make it through here, but I know the speech is going to be better than any other one because of that. But anyway, haven't we all discovered that, no matter if you're talking about tax or medicine or food or voting or whatever it might be, there's some greedy cabal that's up at the top hiding things, hiding the ball from us. So, my hat is off to all the different disciplines and people who are taking a stand. As I say, there were phone numbers in the materials that DV gives, so I just started calling people and started interviewing them basically like they were witnesses in my investigation. And after, so this was going on during 1997, as soon as I got DV Kids materials and just started to pound on leads, on evidence, and accumulating it. And I mean, I accumulated some pretty big file drawers full of evidence, and I'll be showing you a picture of that later. The bottom line was that it came to a point I basically had gathered about all the evidence I could gather that there was a massive problem with the income tax system. So then I turned back to myself and thought, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? And I'm sure you've all met people who are not, they just like, well, okay, that might be true, but you're going to go to jail. Or that might be true, but we can't do anything about it. And, so I had those similar type reactions, but I thought, well, wait a second. Number one, my parents raised me to be a moral person, and if I see wrongdoing, I got to do something about it. That's what they taught me. Number two, I've got 2 boys who look up to me as somebody that has some integrity. Now, can I keep quiet about this and yet tell them throughout their lives that they ought to stand up for what's right? Can't do that either. Well, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So even legally, I've got a duty to do this. And by the way, I took the oath to God, so I mean, hey, I'm not violating that no matter what. So I decided that, in collaboration with different people, that maybe the best thing for me to do would be to bring together at least a sample of the evidence that I had evaluated. And as I say, I didn't say this yet, but I didn't come up with this evidence from scratch, okay? I looked at other people who were making these claims and validated it. Much like an investigator would go to a potential witness and decide, is this person credible enough to get on the witness stand and, help support our case? Or is this person is so credible that they're going to harm our case because it's the other side's witness? So it was just more of a validation process. And what I decided to do, it would have been like very late 1998, early 1999, was to accumulate all of this sample of this evidence and put it into the form of a report, because IRS special agents, as well as pretty much any law enforcement person, puts together reports where they accumulate all the evidence, the testimony, and they present it to a prosecutor, right, to decide if the person should be prosecuted. And so I went ahead and put together this report called Investigating the Federal Income Tax. And the allegations were that due to constitutional limitations that most Americans aren't required to file income tax returns and pay income tax, the 16th Amendment was never ratified, and the U.S. government finances operations from unconstitutional creation of fiat money. Well, I know you guys already know all this stuff, but I was a Johnny-come-lately, and somebody told me that this might be true, and I came to find out that it was. Well, I presented this report to my supervisors, and I addressed the report to the commissioner of the IRS, and I asked my immediate supervisors if they would simply present my evidence up the chain of command hopefully up to and including Commissioner Rosati at the time. And, I thought I was pretty sincere, and I conveyed my sincerity in my letter. I had a 4-page letter, which is available on my website, freedomabovefortune.com. But to synthesize it, I said, if the service declines to conduct its own analysis or dismisses the evidence in this report without proper review, then I must tender my resignation. My oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States was made to God, and I cannot serve 2 masters. Well, I got a tiny little terse response to my letter. This is from the chief of our division, who I'm sure is long since retired, Paul Varvel. And he said, among other things, that the Internal Revenue Service will not be responding to your request to review your work and will provide you with the paperwork to tender your resignation. So they also sent me home for a week of administrative leave so that I could think about what I was going to do. They didn't fire me. They just sent me home for admin leave for a week so that I could decide what my next move would be. And I thought that, perhaps I'd burned a bridge or two. And that if I wanted to save my reputation, it might be a good idea if I move on. So I prepared a letter to Commissioner Rosati, and you should notice the date, February 25th, 1999. February 25th is my birthday. And so I resigned on my birthday, but that's not the only thing that happened on February 25th, and I'll show you in a moment. So I told the commissioner, based on the futility of continuing to work for an agency that has standards and practices so different from what it professes, and standards and practices so contrary to my own, I'm officially resigning from the position of IRS CID Special Agent effective the 25th. So you can see how this is fitting together. I spoke at the Freedom Law School event 10 years ago, March of 1999, and I had just resigned a few weeks earlier, February 25th, 99. But I wanted to show you, this is out of Bill Benson's Law That Never Was book, a photocopy of a particular page. And this is the beginning of the proclamation certificate for the 16th Amendment. So Philander Knox, the Secretary of State at the time, proclaimed on February 25th, 1913, that the income tax 16th Amendment was ratified, which of course those who have studied the matter and studied Bill Benson's research see that that was a complete fraud, that it had not been ratified, but nonetheless he proclaimed it so. But the day that he proclaimed it, that it became officially the 16th Amendment, was February 25th, 1913. 50 years before I was born. So that February 25th date kept on coming up in my life. Well, after I resigned in February of 99, I had, a wife and 2 boys and had to make a living somehow, and I quit the job cold turkey. I had about 3 or 4 days of notice to myself because I had decided that I was going to resign. And so, having worked for a government agency for 5.5 years, my network outside of government was a bit rusty. So I don't really like thinking about those days. It was pretty difficult financially to survive, but I did. And one of the things that I would occasionally do would be to help people with their IRS issues. I didn't pursue it, but people seemed to pursue me because I guess they figured if I worked for the IRS, I knew everything about it. In addition to occasionally helping people with IRS matters, apparently, or I came to learn that there were very few IRS agents who believed and spoke as I did. So of course that made me to have kind of a target, but I appeared on C-SPAN, 60 Minutes 2, the New York Times, and MSNBC. Maybe some people have seen that clip with Maria Bartiromo and America Freedom to Fascism with Ron Paul. These are all things that just kind of happened, and people asked me if I wanted to do that, and I really didn't want to. I didn't want to be on TV. But, they just couldn't find any other former special agent, I guess, that would say what I was saying. So there I was. So during these years, 2000, 2001, 2002, really ever since, but especially those first years, 99, 2000, 2001. When I was invited, I would go and speak, as I'm doing now, and telling my story. And there's a group called the We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education, headed up by Robert Schulz. And he and his foundation printed a bunch of full-page ads in the USA Today. Did anybody ever see those or heard about those? Maybe third or half? There's also two other former IRS agents, Sherry Jackson, who some of you may have heard of, and John Turner. So I wasn't the only one. I guess right today I kind of am, but the only one that's able to be free and speak about these things. But we were very public with our beliefs. I guess some people could say sticking it right in the face of the government, but we didn't have that intention. We just wanted people to know how we felt, what we believed. But of course, when you put ads in the USA Today and you appear on these big shows, guess who's definitely watching? We also had a hearing, courtesy of the We the People Foundation, that was supposed to be held in Washington, D.C. Robert Schulz was able to gain the support of various officials in the government. He actually got Congressman Roscoe Bartlett to agree to hold actual hearings, a congressional hearing on the legitimacy of the enforcement of the income tax. And this is a letter. This is a letter on Congressman Bartlett's letterhead in his own handwriting to that effect. Now, another thing that Robert Schulz did through his, he fasted for 20 days to try to tell people he was going to fast until he died to get some redress for our concerns about the income tax. And he actually secured the signature of, I guess I could use this little, of Daniel Bryant with the United States Department of Justice. Actually a handwritten note from him that he would bring officials from the government to appear to talk about this. Well, notice that date, July 20th, 01. What happened a couple months later? September 11th. And because of that, the hearings got postponed, and then not only that, but the officials started to back out. Bryant kind of claims that he never made such an agreement. The IRS personnel responded verbally and committed verbally that they would come to the hearing. They backed out, and even Congressman Bartlett backed out. So, as I said before, you know that there's one particular agency that was watching my every move, even though they wouldn't answer any of my questions. They were definitely watching what I was up to. And so they decided that on behalf of a client, or two clients that I had, that they were going to file a complaint against me for disreputable conduct. Now, the clients were totally happy with my services because I basically would go into the IRS and, very calmly and professionally show them how there were particular fraudulent aspects to their case against my clients. Well, I don't know how many people of you have dealt with CPAs and attorneys, the ones out of the phone book, but usually they're just telling you, okay, this is how much you write the check for, and this is, give it to them. I mean, that's usually the way they settle. Where I was actually digging into the information to find out, whether there was fraud in this case. So they didn't like that. So the IRS filed a complaint against me. They've got this group called the Office of Professional Responsibility. It used to be called the Director of Practice, but they didn't like the acronym DOPE, so they changed it. And then that complaint wasn't good enough. They had to amend the complaint and add even more charges, more allegations. And those allegations were that I did not file a federal income tax return for 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002. How many people think that you get due process in our country? Okay, I'm talking to the wrong crowd. Well, how many think we should be getting due process? Okay. Well, I thought so too. And so there's actually provisions within the regulations that when you're accused of these, it's not a crime, but accused of this misconduct, that you actually get a hearing You get to confront your accusers. You get to examine their evidence, do discovery, all those kinds of things. Well, and a public hearing, thank you. And that's what the regulations said that I deserved. Well, I didn't get that at all. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned public hearing, because I'm supposed to have a public hearing to address these concerns. Well, the government thought that the best place to hold my hearing, now remember, I'm just a mild-mannered accountant, a CPA. I mean, I used to be a special agent, but I mean, I'm not Al Capone. At least I didn't think I was being treated like that, but I started to wonder. They decided to have my hearing at the time they were going to schedule it at the United States Coast Guard Island in San Francisco Bay, where the public can't go. You have to get to that island by a bridge. It's got MPs, barbed wire. You know, only people come on or off who they say come on or off. So that's where they initially wanted to have my hearing. Now, I couldn't find a picture of Coast Guard Island, so I used Alcatraz just as a... Which, did you hear Obama wants to open Alcatraz back up? I'm getting scared because I might end up being there. Well, fortunately, and again, this is where I give thanks to Paymon, the Free Enterprise Society, all the people in the freedom movement who helped me to gain quite a network of support. And so when I have an email list, and when I sent out to my email list that they were going to haul me off to Coast Guard Island, and CGI for the acronym, so I said they're going to Shanghai me on CGI, and people just started calling and faxing the IRS and their congressmen, and then lo and behold, they changed the hearing location to the federal building. So thankfully, because people cared and people spoke up, as soon as the light goes on, then the government changes their spots and they have the hearing at the federal building, or at least they scheduled it. Now, I never got that hearing that they changed the location for. Instead, they gave me what was called a sanction proceeding, and that's basically where they're not there to determine your guilt or your liability for it. They just are there to determine how high you should hang. Not whether or not you should hang, just how high you should hang. So the judge, this William B. Moran, he was an administrative law judge for the Environmental Protection Agency. A real expert with CPA and IRS matters. And he granted the summary judgment. So I was disbarred from practice before the Internal Revenue Service, meaning that I can't formally, go in with a client to help them with their IRS matters or speak to an IRS agent on the phone. They treat me like the invisible man. I appealed that decision to the Secretary of the Treasury because that's the person you're supposed to appeal to. I listed the various grievances: no discovery, no right to testify, no hearing, on and on and on. And when we got word of the decision, now remember, I appealed to the Secretary of the Treasury. That's the person that's supposed to hear my appeal. Well, when we got the word of the decision, the fax header at the top said IRS Chief Counsel. Now, can you tell me why the very agency that's complaining against me is the very agency that's ruling on my appeal? I thought that was strange. And then here's the guy who did it. Look at that title. You get paid by the number of words in your title. That's why that guy's a very highly paid government servant. But as you can see, he's acting as the delegate, but he works for the IRS. He's an IRS employee ruling on my appeal against an IRS complaint. So do you think he ruled in my favor? Anyway, the IRS, when they issued a press release about this rejection of my appeal, they said that the Treasury Department has denied my appeal. So the fun and games for me had only just begun. In November of 2004, I was indicted for conspiring to defraud the United States of America and for preparing 3 false income tax returns. I was indicted along with my client, Al Thompson. Now, interestingly, the press release, which my defense attorneys who'd been in this business quite a while said was unprecedented, is the kind of language that they used in the press release to basically say, you know, I had already done these things. Like here, Joe Banister knew exactly what he was doing. All these people were adversely affected by the actions of Mr. Banister. What happened to that, you know, day in court and innocent till proven guilty? So they said I conspired to defraud the United States of America by helping my client to stop withholding from his workers' paychecks and by preparing these amended tax returns. Which, by the way, all I did was I followed the exact rule book, the exact rules in the IRS rule book about how to pursue a refund for the client. That's what I did. The problem for the IRS, though, is that they trained me too well. Remember when I was talking about all those file cabinets that I had accumulated of evidence? Well, this is my one of my defense attorneys, Jeffrey Dickstein, an incredible attorney. And my boxes were even taller than him. And he said, you know, Joe, we got to start preparing for this trial, obviously, so send me your research. So I did. And then when we were going to ask the judge for more time to prepare, Jeff actually attached this picture to his motion. Picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it? So I really don't have time to get into the trial was quite incredible. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy to be prosecuted and face, you know, federal prison for something you didn't even do, but you know, that's kind of typical what the IRS does. And I would ask you, of course, to pray and pray for those who aren't as fortunate as me in escaping their dirty trick bag. Before the trial even started, they tried to disqualify one of my attorneys, not pictured. His name's Robert Bernhoft in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, another excellent attorney, incredible man. But they tried to disqualify him the weekend before the Monday when my trial was supposed to start. They had an IRS revenue agent who testified. He was their expert about the returns that I prepared. And he couldn't point out on you know, there's direct testimony and cross-examination. And on direct, he didn't say anything was false about them. And so I thought what was interesting is on cross-examination, Jeffrey Dickstein is asking the guy, what's false about it? You know, it's like we were so sure there was nothing false about it that we wanted to bring up the issue of false. Where's the false stuff? And he couldn't point out anything that was false in the returns. And in fact, he pointed out, well, when he was pointed to various things that I had done in the returns, he admitted that they were actually true. So he ended up being a really good witness for me. They kept asking, they asked the IRS agent and all the witnesses about a conspiracy, you know, and none of them could testify that they had any evidence or encounter with anything resembling a conspiracy. Wouldn't you think that if they were prosecuting me for a conspiracy, they could have some witnesses that could testify to that? No, they couldn't. No witnesses could do that. No evidence either. The special agent, Sean Breslin, who I used to work with, he was the case agent on my case, and he testified that he encountered no evidence that the IRS was ever impeded, impaired, or obstructed, which is the things I was accused of conspiring to do. We only called one witness, which was my former supervisor, and he testified about my good character. Not one juror ever voted for conviction during the entire deliberation proceeding. And one of the prosecutors didn't even show up for the verdict. I always run out of time every year to be able to talk about this, but basically a prosecutor that I used to work with when I was at the IRS testified, and he actually, on my behalf, tried to get me a meeting with his supervisor, who was the chief prosecutor for the entire western United States. The guy's name is Ron Cimino. And my former colleague, Tom DiLeonardo, asked Mr. Cimino if he would meet with me. And it was kind of funny the language he used. But Tom, my former friend, said, "My associates are mostly notorious illegal tax protesters who would most assuredly be disruptive and uncooperative. They really don't know us very well." Anyway, long story short, as I was found not guilty of all charges, no surprise to me. So in closing, my few ideas about what we can do, certainly verify the information I've shared with you for myself. Look and see what the IRS has to say. I'm sure that the truth will percolate to the top for you. And if you agree that the IRS is deceiving us all, tell your friends, tell your family. Put up with a few odd looks, like you were born with two heads. The most important thing, having gone through this criminal trial process, is to help us all infect the jury pool with the truth. Of course, always you should pray daily to God to help heal our land. Support those of us on the front line. JeffDickstein.com, you can get more information on his defense of the 16th Amendment issue for Bill Benson. Operation Stop Thief, for those of you that attended Tom Cryer's presentation yesterday, go to truthattack.org. That's going to be a real fun April 15th this year. It was pretty fun last year, but there's going to be a whole lot more groups that are joining us this year. I have a radio show. It's at themicroeffect.com every Thursday from 2 to 3. And I hope to have a show soon on Liberty Works Radio Network, if anyone's ever heard of Save a Patriot Fellowship. That's libertyworksradionetwork.com. And how many people have seen America Freedom to Fascism? I like that. It's obviously a very powerful tool to educate others, so use it. freedomtofascism.com, you can get some very inexpensive DVDs. Of course, you can YouTube, do a search for Freedom to Fascism, it'll come right up. And also, in closing, just want you to make sure you watch your back, because anybody heard about this? The Missouri State Police were given a manual or some information indicating that anybody that supported Ron Paul, Bob Barr, Chuck Baldwin, or Libertarian are terrorists. And even if you promote that movie right there, America Freedom to Fascism, the Missouri State Police have told you to, or told their officers to watch out for you. So I'd invite you to go to my website, freedomabovefortune.com. I've got a blog where there's a lot of background information. I've got a biography where you can actually click on various exhibits. And I'd always invite you to join my mailing list. You don't have to use your real name, just like an IRS agent. And I believe that's about it. Thank you very much.